Greetings, friends and fellow freelancers. Welcome back to another episode of Tabletop Mercenary. Apologies in advance for any audio issues. I am doing my best to keep things within the levels, but as you likely saw in our last video, I have acquired a new toy, and I'm working with the new audio interface to sort of figure out where everything is and where my volume needs to be. With that said, though, I wanted to address a common criticism that I've been running into pretty steadily over the past 5 years or more at this point. And because it's one of those things that when one person raises the issue, you can explain it. When 5 people, 10 people, 100 people all raise the issue, I feel like it needs a wider discussion than something you can have in a comment section between 2 people. And I've heard it for Army Men, I've heard it for Sundara, I have heard it for even games I'm not attached to that I'm talking about, of games like Bloodlines and Black Magic, which you should absolutely check out if this is your first time hearing of it. Link in the description below for all of these games that I have mentioned. I highly recommend checking out all of them. However, the common criticism is and has always been, why did you use Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition for this? Or why is this so close to D&D 5e? Why is everything using this system? The answer is fairly obvious. However, I feel that maybe pulling back the curtain and explaining the thought process behind it and what's going on and maybe throwing out some numbers might explain why people keep running into this situation. So, first and foremost, let's get the obvious out of the way of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. While it may not be the current edition of the game, was the reigning champion of RPGs as far as sales, size, and audience goes for about a decade. And aside from a blip with 4th edition, the last time that the company tried to argue with the peace treaty that had been laid out, Dungeons & Dragons has basically always been one of the major staples of the industry. Going back to its 2nd edition, it is the game that most people start off with. It's what they know the hobby for. It's the one that's depicted in pop culture and mass media. And because of that, and specifically because of the agreement that allowed creators to make things for the setting, which really brought it to its height in 3rd, 3.5, etc., etc., it was the biggest share of the market, and arguably still is the biggest share of the market if we just look at the sheer number of products released for it. And this becomes something of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Because I've mentioned this repeatedly on this particular show, I've talked about it over and over again on the channel, but when you are in publishing, not even just RPGs, just publishing in general, you have 3 separate ways of making money. You have your cash cows, which are people who are regularly going to make small purchases. You have your gold stars, which are people who are going to buy huge things. They're going to take big risks on something. And then, well, you have your duds. We're not going to talk about duds for now, though they do feature a lot into the math that comes with what companies will and won't greenlight and what people do and don't choose to publish. But as an example, with my own work, if you look at my catalog, you'll see my 100 random whatever. It's the majority of the supplements I've put out and that I've written, and the reason I write them is because they sell well enough to justify their existence. People will buy a handful of them every couple of weeks, every couple of months, and when enough people are buying a handful of things, that allows me to pay my rent on time and everyone is happy and everything is hunky-dory. Consider full games like Army Men. Army Men is a gold star. It's a bigger purchase, it's something that not a lot of people are going to be interested in, and it's a much bigger risk, especially in an economy like this. I'm glad when people buy it. I love moving more copies of that book. I like the idea that people are out there playing the game, but I'm a realist. That is not going to be the thing I make my living on. I feel like if it was going to explode and go viral and allow me to buy several houses and give all my friends a place to stay worry-free, it would have happened by now. And then, of course, you have your duds, which are things that just don't sell. The problem is, it's very difficult to tell which project is going to be which, and publishers and individuals who are looking to make money rather than just put something out that is a pet project, a personal project that's very close to their heart, They look at the numbers for everything, and they are trying to figure out which category their current project falls into, so they can figure out roughly what is a reasonable expense to make it happen, what is something that's just, it's never going to make back. This is where Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition comes in. Because if you are looking for, not a guarantee, but if you're looking to stack the odds a little bit in the favor of your project, you are going to try and give it every advantage possible. And if you were writing not even just fantasy RPGs, RPGs in general, whether it was sci-fi, whether it was fantasy, whether it was horror, so many games used Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition because according to some of the numbers I once saw put up, it was more than 80% of the market of all online games played on Roll20. Now, Now that is not all games played everywhere. There are lots of people who don't play online. There are lots of people who use other platforms, other systems, or who just use a standard, web chat forum, or who use Discord, or use whatever else that wasn't going to be recorded. So you could argue that is not the full picture. But if you also look at things like which products sell the most on DriveThruRPG, if you also ask things like, well, which ones are talked about most, which ones are seen by a majority of the audience, you are going to see more and more and more and more that games that existed or had a port to Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition generally sold better. And so it became something where, well, this is the game that commands the majority of the market. The majority of attention, players, game masters, products, etc. are geared toward this game. And so you could release something small, you could release something indie, you could release something for a different system as long as you had the rights and abilities to do so. But it's going to be harder to get people to play that because it's not the dominant game. And this is where it all comes into focus. Because I will say, as someone, as a designer who has been doing this job throughout the rise and reign of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, it is deeply frustrating to try and design things for. It is more frustrating to try and convert things to. I have done both of these things. I will absolutely do more of these things in the future as long as the products keep selling and the checks keep coming. But if someone were to say to me, hey, what's your passion project? What do you really want to do with this? At no point in time would D&D 5e even come anywhere near the top of that heap. But needs be when the devil drives, and if you want your project to actually be successful, if you want people to buy it, check it out, play it, you need to make it for the thing they want, the tyranny of the audience, as some might call it. And it's one of those things of, yes, there are a lot of games that just aren't meant to be in that structure. There are a lot of things it cannot do. There are a lot of things that are very frustrating about it. The question at the end of the day was, do you want to make money, or do you want to have this project be closer to your vision? Because all of the games that I have mentioned either didn't start as 5e ports, or have things other than 5e ports for them. But that was the one required to make the publisher happy. It was the one required to possibly reach the audience, because at the end of the day, the audience has to want what you make. And so, if you're one of those people who is just tired of 5th edition, you're tired of seeing stuff made for it, even if it's not official, stuff that's outside the Forgotten Realms, outside Ravenloft, you're tired of seeing people have to convert all of their home worlds, all of their home games, all of their home campaigns to D&D 5e, and you're sitting there just screaming at the sky, asking why it's everywhere. The answer why it's everywhere is, it's what a majority of people wanted. And when you are attempting to court the market, you have to go to either the biggest pond there is, because that's where the most people are going to be, or you have to be a big fish in a small pond, and you have to be so dominant in that area that the smaller amount of people makes up for the fact that, well, your game has a much more niche appeal. You either need everybody in the small group to buy it, or you need a portion of the big group to buy it. And not a lot of folks are willing to take that risk that they can capture a smaller market completely. They would rather try to capture as big a piece of the big market as possible. And so that is the long and short of it, really, of it's the reason so much stuff is and was Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, because it's what people wanted, it's what would sell, it's what people would play. And as I have said repeatedly, of getting D&D 5e mains to play any other game, any other system, was an exercise in futility. It took Wizards of the Coast doing what they did with the whole OGL kerfuffle to finally get any of them to try and play anything else. And at the end of the day, a lot of them just kept playing D&D 5e and just stopped supporting Hasbro directly. And you could make the argument that that was a good thing, but at the same time, if players have the one system that they like and they won't play any other system, you either need to write them off as a potential market, or you need to make stuff for the system that they want. And that might be frustrating, it might be annoying, it might be limiting in a lot of ways, but the only way that that will change is if you as a player, if you as a community, if we as gamers do more to support things outside that main demographic, outside that thing that everybody knows, whether that's trying to introduce some of your friends to different games or buying stuff from indie creators. We cannot make things, at the end of the day, we can't make games, we can't write books if those books don't sell, because the whole point of us putting in the creative effort, the creative energy, whether it's making videos or writing articles or putting out supplements and new games, is that we want to pay our bills, and this needs to have a return on the investment. The amount of people who can do stuff purely for the love of the game, who do not need it to sell well, who just need it to exist, is a tiny part of an already tiny market. I may have mentioned this once before, but you could take basically the entire North American RPG market and cram it into a ballroom at Gen Con. There's a couple hundred people who make all of this happen, at most. It's very small, and a lot of us we are working in tiny, tiny margins. And so again, if you want to support creativity, you want people to be able to break away from having to do that thing that you are just tired of seeing, I support that. I would love more games, more systems, more everything, more variety, because even if something turns out not to be for me, or we all agree it turned out to be a bad endeavor, the ability to experiment, the ability to try new stuff is definitely important, and we should all be doing more of it. But you can't do that at the end of the day if you are worried about how much money you're going to walk away with and how much time and energy you spent making this thing happen. So if you want to see more independent games, more independent styles, there needs to be a market for it. Otherwise, everybody's just going to have to keep going back to the trough, and they're going to have to keep, dishing out what it is people are eating. But that's all for this week. Hopefully this was enlightening for some folks. I'm sure most of us already knew this, but it's just been very frustrating seeing people demand to know why the gaming industry exists the way it does and why there are so many games for the system, when the answer to me felt very obvious. But again, I'm a designer and I've been here the whole time, so what seems obvious to me may not seem obvious to people who are on the other end of things and just playing games as consumers. But as always, if you have questions, if there's something you want me to address, and if the sound sounds good this week, let me know that down in the comments, and till next time, this is your Tabletop Mercenary, signing off. First and foremost, thank you for staying to the end of this episode of Tabletop Mercenary. If there's a question you have about being an RPG creator, please don't hesitate to put it in the comments below so I can address it in a future episode. If you want to help me keep the lights on and keep this show going, then please consider subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and giving it a share on your own social media pages to help boost the signal. Lastly, if you really enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a tip by buying me a Ko-fi or becoming a Patreon patron at the links in the video description below. You'll find me on both sites under the name The Literary Mercenary.